Hey, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to week one of the course. I just want to go real quickly into sort of I guess first off, you should expect check-in every week by Tuesday morning, usually, and I will have a quick video announcement posted up each and every week. You'll need to check in every week here to get the video announcements because we're sort of building, in some ways, we're building the syllabus as we go. I mean, and so in order to gain some guidance for the week, I don't actually have like a weekly assignment sheet that you're going to read. So I want you to check in every week because I want us to have some flexibility in the course where we can begin to talk about what you guys are talking about in your discussion posts. So I want to have the freedom to be able to address what's on you guys' minds in terms of the readings for the course, the indigenous uh, various indigenous groups, writers from various indigenous communities and groups that will be reading this semester. The three writers essentially. I want some freedom to sort of work with that, depending on how your discussion posts feed into that. But I also want to be able to respond to what's on you folks' mind as students, to us as a class, as a group of readers that are going to be reading these texts and thinking about, what is the current state and health of indigenous communities around the globe. What are their daily issues? What are their daily struggles? How it is that they've survived? How up to the 21st century, and oftentimes against some pretty substantial sort of odds in terms of power relations between indigenous communities and those settler communities who came and eventually settled in their lands. And I want to be really clear about what I mean in some ways by indigenous versus settler, at least in the context and the way that we're going to be using these terms in this course. Prior to the great expansion of sort of Western Europe around the globe, and there have been other similar such expansions, the Roman Empire being one of the most obvious, but prior to that, there was little to any attention paid in some ways to indigenous communities. Western Europe was not even aware that they even existed, essentially. And so within a very short expanse of time, within just over 500 some odd years at this point, um, 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 the ability to know about other places on the globe, that ability has shrunk greatly. And so I want us to be able, as we're pushing forward in this course, I want the flexibility for us to be able to explore the entire world of global indigenous communities, even though we're going to be talking about three writers from three very specific communities. The first that we'll be reading is Velma Wallace, who comes from what's now known as Alaska, but who is Kitchen and Athabascan, people from the southeastern central part of what's now known as the state of Alaska. That'll be your reading for the first week, but I want us to have the freedom to explore because this concept of indigenous and this concept of settler touches us in how we sort of understand the world. In that, by settler, I mean any person who's post Western European expansion around the globe in around 1492, I guess, when the Spanish colonial forces sort of landed here in what's now known as the United States, or actually down in the Caribbean, this place that suddenly became known as the Americas. Any cultural group who was existent at that time would essentially be known as indigenous communities. Every other cultural group that's come after that moment, we will refer to as settler communities. Um, um, or settlers, right? Because that's the demarcation I think that makes this class important, and we need to keep that context in mind as we sort of go forward, right? That most of the stuff that we'll be reading will be dealing with that sort of marker of difference in some ways, and how it represents that difference and how it speaks across and to and with that difference, right? Sometimes that difference will be a site of resistance, and it will be a site of a contest, of what's contestation, right? It'll be a site that's fraught with ambiguity, as to what is a settler sometimes and what is indigenous. And so we'll explore some of those definitions as we go forward. I want you to have the freedom in this class to be able to sort of talk about some of these issues in your discussion posts, but I want you to find this information out on your own, and begin to sort of, in your discussion post, it's really self-explanatory. You can look at mine for week 2, or actually I want to post another one for week 1. I already have one in week 1, but I will probably go into week 1 and make my own post as well. I'll probably post a thread in there myself, just so you can sort of gain another understanding of what it is that I'm looking for. So take the time this week to really think about what you want to post and talk about. Think about what it is that led you to this class, what is about this concept of indigenousness that's brought you here to this class to this day, because it's important to keep in mind, I think we've witnessed in the last 12 months and even in the last 24 months, and even since going back to 1970, but that's 40 years. But really recently, I think this concept of indigenousness, I think, is becoming to the forefront. And people are beginning to pay attention to indigenous communities in the early part of the 21st century as they never have before. And that's often at sometimes sites of contest. Contestation over who has the right to represent and control representation and who doesn't. And so, I mean, I think it's important to know, regardless of what we may think, and an example of this, I guess, regardless of what we may think of the Disney Corporation, one of the most popular animated films right now that's grossed $240 million or so is Moana, right? Pacific Islander, based upon some Pacific Island tale, none other than Miranda, the great Hamilton musical writer, who's written the music for it. It's this big production. It's making big money. So this idea, the indigenous, is deeply within the minds and the imaginations of our systems of representation that we're working with now. So I want you to have that freedom in your discussion post to talk about some of this stuff, whatever it is that interests you. And you can take a look at mine as an example. And you need to read Velma Wallace's 2 Old Women for this week. And it's about 136 pages, but it's a different format of book. You'll access that through, it's there on the left-hand side on the Blackboard page. Give it some time to download. It may take a little while. It's a large file. I've scanned the whole book. It's 136 pages, but it's really typed in its large print. You should be able to read through it fairly quickly. When you're reading Wallace, I want you to think about, it's not an elaborate sort of work of literature. And in comparison to Silko and Patricia Grace's Potiki, it's a very straightforward tale. It's a fable, almost, I guess. But it's obviously a story that was very important to Velma Wallace, and I think it lays a pretty strong philosophical foundation for where I want us to go forward in terms of what I mean. I want you to. It's a story about 2 old women and a story of survival, and a story about a community and how they deal with aging and how they deal with worth of the individual, and how they survive into the future. And so it's an imagined tale, but also one that also might have a degree of truth to it. It's from an old oral family story that was passed down to the writer of this, Velma Wallace, from her mother. So be sure to read the introduction. So I want you to read the story and think about what its underpinnings of its philosophical understanding of what the role of the individual is to a community, and read it in that sense. And so maybe almost like a fable, right? I've sort of been hesitant to use that term fable, but I think it may be appropriate. Sorry, it's my dog. So read Wallace's work, and I would suggest you read some of it maybe even before you make your post. And then see if after reading Wallace's work, if you don't have, and maybe I'll post something else. I was going to post on Moana, but I think I'll make a post on Alaska with this. So, just to sort of give you an understanding of how the discussion posts sort of relate to the books. And then what we'll do with these discussion posts at the end of the semester is you'll use all of this evidence in some way, all of this information that we've been able to obtain with. There's 27 of us in this class. 27 times 15 do the math, right? We're going to have this large number of different resource material in order to draw from to sort of answer your final essay. So be diligent in doing your research, weigh your sources, be prepared to talk about them. I will engage with you in the discussion section by sort of commenting on the stuff that you write. I'll probably do it there in public so everyone could read. The discussion things are only worth 4 points apiece, but that can add up. There's 15 of them, so that's 60 points to your grade. So that's well over half your grade. So be sure to do the discussion post. That'll be it for this week. Just check back in. Like I said, at every Tuesday there'll be a new announcement. You'll need to read all of Wallace's Two Old Women this week. Don't put it off. Read it. It lays the foundation for our course, and then we'll be back to talk about Silco next week. So you'll need to have at least Almanac of the Dead purchased before next week, and be prepared to dive right into Silco. But for this week, read Wallace's Two Old Women. And I'll have some stuff to say about that next week, as well as to kick us off into Silco. Thank you so much for being a part of the class. Just so you know too, each and every time you check in on Blackboard, there's a record given of it, and I won't take attendance, but I will be able to gauge your participation in the course by whether or not you're completing the discussion post week to week in a timely manner, and whether or not you're checking in on the course. And keep in mind, all work for this course is due on the last day of class. It's probably be best and most advantageous if you completed your work from week to week. But if you fall behind, I'm not going to be sitting around and be saying something's late, something's late, something's late. The work is pretty straightforward, and it all needs to be due by the last day of class. All right, I'll check in with you next week. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. Yeah, watch them.